So I'm seeing those dangerous words on my screen. Recording and transcription are activated and started. So that always means from now on, I have to be careful what I'm saying because everything can be used against me and it's recorded for posterity. So good morning, everybody from New York. My name is Stefan Schweinfest. I'm the director of the UN Statistics Division. I welcome everybody to this first meeting of this webinar series of the International Statistical Classification Sprint. So let me first say, I see the number 200 and something up there. So this is phenomenal. We have a lot of people around the world connected to this. Thank you very much. It is early in New York and here in the Western Hemisphere.
Stefan, you're muted.
Hello. Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry. Yes. So I don't know where I disappeared. I certainly didn't touch my computer here because my staff always tells me not to touch any buttons. So again, I was saying we have a number 226 right now on the top of my screen, and that is.
Yeah, you mute. Stefan, you're muted again.
Sorry, something happens here. I have to be careful that I don't, something muted me. Okay, let's try this again. So we are phone button. I do not know why it automatically mutes me. Okay. Somebody who's maybe on the central theme. All also mutes me, so you have to be careful with that. Okay, let's try this again. Welcome to everybody around the world to this sprint. And it is a first because we have two groups here that are organizing this together. On the one hand, we have the UN Network of Economic Statisticians, represented by Andre, and our co-chair, and Shauda. And on the other hand, we have the room of the UN Committee of Experts on International Classification that are meeting in New York this week, and we are taking the advantage of this opportunity to bring these two communities together, which always is a very exciting thing for the United Nations to do. So we call this thing a sprint, but people who have been familiar with us know that you better take a deep breath because our sprints sometimes can turn into little marathons because we have had long-time impact in some of the topics that we have been discussing. So let me explain a little bit this concept of an international statistical classification sprint. The Network of Economic Statisticians is a group under the Statistical Commission that brings together the international community to identify themes in the area of economic statistics and leverage the expertise of this very dedicated and broad international group. And we have discussed since 2021 in this format of Sprint, which is a sequence of webinars that are thematically connected, issues like beyond GDP, most recently data access and measurement of inflation of owner-occupied housing sprints. So it's very broad and very specific topics. And I'm very happy that we today have joined hands with the UN Committee of Experts on Classification. That is, of course, bringing together all the global experts in the classification area. I just was able to tell this committee that is actually physically meeting in New York right now yesterday in the opening speech that classifications, of course, and we all know that here, are critically important. They are a fundamental element of the statistical infrastructure and the backbone of official statistics. In particular, international statistical classifications, because they allow us the comparability of data, and by being so precise in defining the elements, they are an important element of quality assurance, because then we know very precisely how to interpret certain data elements. Sometimes perhaps the work of classifications is not so prominent and visible like other sectors. I have to defend my microphone again. And sometimes maybe it's under-resourced, but I'm very happy that we have all the statistical experts on classification in one room together, and it's a wonderful cross-section of the world to discuss important topics such as integration, classifications as a tool of integration of statistical domains, the issues of how often do we need to revise classifications in order to be operational, but also relevant, how agile do we want to be, and also what is the role of modern technology in the universe of classification. So I think these are all topics being discussed by the classification community, and this is very important, and they will provide the guidance to the global community back to the Statistical Commission. But we also wanted to bring this work to a much broader audience, and this is how we do this with this webinar and a series of webinars that we would call a sprint, because that gives the classification community an opportunity to connect with users and with other partners, and also highlight the importance of investing in classification as one of our foundational elements for data integration. So we were very happy. We actually had over 600 participants from various regions registering for this meeting. Not all of them are here. We are at 250 now, which is a phenomenal number. But as it is recorded, we can hope that some people will look at the conclusions of this meeting. So we have a very broad reach. In this first webinar, we will concentrate on data integration, highlight various aspects on data integration and linkage for the classification work, integration within the economic statistics sphere, linkages also between international, national, and regional classifications, other classifications. Yes, I'm back. And I hope that by the end of this seminar and this whole sprint, we will all recognize the importance of classifications and so on. So I'm very happy to say that with this webinar, in our experience and with this format of webinars and sprints, we have quite a broader reach. It's not only the national statistical offices and international organizations, which are perhaps our core constituencies of the global statistical system, but it's also all our partners in the wider ecosystem, and in particular also some users and analysts and policymakers that can provide us with the important opportunity to have a dialogue here. So at the end, let me just thank a few people who have made this possible. On the one side, of course, we have the UN network, and they are under, as I mentioned already, the leadership of Andre and Shahuda, and many people working in the background. And on the other side, we have the Committee of Experts on International Statistical Classifications under the chair of Andrew Hancock. So I think we have a lot of really good people and speakers for today's event, and I'm thanking them and I'm thanking you for participating, and I'm looking forward to a very interactive discussion. Thank you very much. Over back to the chair.
I think, Stefan, the handoff was to me. I'll say a few things and then I'll hand it over to the chair of the sprint. So thank you, Stefan, for those remarks. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us at this webinar, which brings together so many experts in the area of classifications, but also users of these classifications, as Stefan said. I'm Andre Larange. I'm the Assistant Chief Statistician at Statistics Canada, responsible for economic statistics. In a former role as Assistant Chief Statistician, I was also responsible for classification. So I think this sprint is of personal interest to me. But I'm also, as Stefan said, the co-chair of the UN Network of Economic Statisticians. So on the behalf of the network, I'd like to welcome you to the sprint. Certainly well attended. This is, I think, one of our better, well-attended sprints. We've already got 266 people online, and I think, if I recall correctly, there over 600 had registered. So we'll see how that plays out throughout the event. But happy to see that those numbers are climbing. As Stefan also said, the network has organized several sprints on a variety of topics over the last 2 years. We've covered the topic of owner-occupied housing in the CPI. We've had 2 beyond GDP sprints. Data access has also been covered. And the sprints have brought together experts and practitioners to explore issues and propose some solutions to the statistical ecosystem in terms of problems that are relevant in those particular domains. Our role as a network is to bring communities together, foster networking and discussions, and also push the agenda to the committees that actually have the mandates to sort of affect change. So we're not sort of trying to duplicate things here. We're really trying to sort of bring together common knowledge and so on, and discuss priorities and so on, and give a signal to this statistical community about sort of where we see the priorities. The network, this webinar is organized jointly, again, by the Network of Economic Statisticians, but also the United Nations Committee of Experts on International Statistical Classification. So it's a first in that sense because we're partnering with an expert group. It's also a first, I think, because this is our first hybrid sprint, as Benson alluded to earlier. I think we're still working through the technical issues, so hopefully we'll sort those out as well. But it's really an opportunity here to explore the role of statistical classifications for data integration. It'll raise the awareness of the importance of international statistical classification from both internal and external users, and highlight the importance of investing in classification work as a foundation for data integration by showcasing real-life applications inside and outside national statistical offices. Where appropriate, notes on the topics to be discussed will be circulated to participants in advance of the meeting, and we will ensure that the sessions make use of the limited time with focused discussions. Since classifications are a tool for ensuring statistical information is clearly and logically grouped for analysis and comparison purposes, they are the key to producing data which is useful to policymakers, academics, industry and community leaders, and many others. This webinar is an opportunity to share practical experiences which showcase the role of classifications, but more importantly, is a venue to exchange and learn from one another. I hope that you will find the presentations and discussions useful to carrying out your own responsibilities, and I encourage you to participate actively in the discussions. I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion. With this, I would like to pass it on to Franklin Asumu Ngong, who is the chair of the meeting, who will speak about the objectives of the webinar. Over to you, Franklin, in the room. So I'll turn off my mic and leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Stefan, for the great introduction. I think you helped me a lot to, in terms of falling short of what I'm going to say in terms of the objective, because I think you've already presented greatly the objectives of this sprint today. Again, just a quick presentation of myself. Franklin Asumdong, Assistant Director of Statistics Canada of the Center for Statistical Data Standard, also member of course, of this committee of experts, international classification, and work, of course, on different other committees related to classification. So I'm happy to take this role today to just trying to make sure that we cover our agenda today. So very quickly, we want to definitely touch on key point that Andre Stefan already mentioned in terms of showcasing how statistical classification are important into the work that we do every day in our respective organization, and even outside of statistical organization, we know that standards classification are heavily used in everyday work in terms of gathering statistics, doing statistical analysis, and so on. So we will quickly go through some of presentation from Canada, and to really showcase some example of how we do things there as Canada. And we have also other presentation. We try to, during the preparation of this, we will try to make sure that we cover different aspects or different also area, different region. We really want to make sure that we have different perspective in terms of what are the challenges, what are we going through in terms of managing classification in our work. So without further ado, we will start first with the presentation from Canada by Corey Shobanik, Director of Statistical at Canada, and Nisa Kine, also Assistant Director. We're going to talk about, again, the example of how the role that classification plays in the building of statistics as Canada. So if you're ready, Corey and Nisa, we will can take not the floor, but the line. So thank you again, everyone, for the great attendance. Thank you.
Thanks, Franklin. So a little bit of a switch on the fly. So Nessa could not be here today. So my colleague, the director of Enterprise Statistics Division, Stéphane Gilbert, will be taking her place today. So Franklin, can you see the presentation? Okay. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Corey Chmanek. I'm the director for the Center for Statistical and Data Standards, and we're here today to talk about, our standards-based approach to integrated statistics. So I'm going to start off with some just really high-level information around standards, and I think this really relates to the theme that was talked about earlier. Is we're seeing within our own context, standards are becoming extremely important. The data foundation, beyond sort of statistical bounds, within the federal family and beyond. And, I think standards are becoming the thing that people go to initially. And I think this is where international statistical classifications play a really big role. When people come to StatCan website, they come for the data, but you can see 20% of our web traffic are standards. People are interested in leveraging these standards for different purposes. As talked about, the mandate of a statistical organization is to promote these national as well as international statistical classifications and standards, but to enable sort of this interconnected ecosystem where integration becomes very simple and efficient, we're making a lot of inroads into enabling products as well as sort of the implementation of tooling to allow sort of this interconnected ecosystem. And as well as our national statistical organization, we are leading a lot of national level, I would say national level standards initiatives. And I'll say that broadly standards, because standards are really playing that sort of data foundational role. Moving on, one of the things for our federal public service, which is represented by, I would say, 60 departments, is standards are becoming terribly important to allow that common language across all departments. And we're playing that leading role in promoting. I got to present last week around our national industry classification NAICS, which will be one of the first ones that will be mandated by all departments to use. And we're going to be advancing on more and more standards, sort of as a national federal organization. So everyone is speaking that common language. And, I think international statistical classifications play a leading role there too. So, you see this push towards standards, which I think is really, really great thing. And it's sort of something that's been, I would say, under the covers for a long time, but is really becoming part of the forefront. And as a statistical organization, we see more and more projects about cross data or cross domain integration. We're seeing a lot of, projects trying to measure different things, and international classifications and standards broadly play a leading role. But to be able to do this, you do need infrastructure and operations to operationalize this. And I think this is where I'm going to hand it off to Stéphane Gilbert to talk about how we operationalize sort of a lot of our statistical standards within our organization. But we're seeing more and more projects and sort of areas of interest around standards. And to me, this is a really, really great thing. And it's one of those things where statistical organizations can play a really key leadership role. So I'll hand it off to Stéphane.
Thank you, Corey. Do you have the presentation? Okay, perfect. Good. So as Corey said, Nisa won't be here this morning, unfortunately, so I will replace her, and I am the Director of Enterprise Statistics Division at Statistics Canada. So I will try this morning to provide you a good overview of the implementation of the standard throughout IBSP in terms of classification, but also the standard in terms of processing activities. So one of our mandate of the division is doing processing activity for business survey and tax programs. So the main focus today will be on business survey processing activity, so how we use standard throughout the IBSP. So what is the IBSP? The IBSP stands for Integrated Business Statistical Program. It is a generic processing system developed 10 years ago to process business survey. So the goal of IBSP was to be more efficient in terms of processing, so streamlining the survey processing, and also to improve the quality and timeliness of the data. One of the goals was also to provide a standardized framework for most economic survey. Instead of having different kind of system, different way to do the processing and to get the estimation, we want to make sure we are a good capability to compare the data from program to another one. So the system, the IBSP covers statistical process from sampling to the estimation, and it's integrated with other corporate systems at Statistics Canada, like BAND for edit and imputation, or GS for estimation. So we try to maximize the corporate system, and it's another way to apply the standard across the organization. It is a metadata-driven system. For example, when we want to change the imputation strategy, we don't need to change the code in the program. We don't need to involve IT people. So the team in charge of the processing activity can change the parameter. It's fast, flexible, and reduce the risk of error. So it's another way to apply a kind of standard in terms of processing. So we developed this system 10 years ago, but twice a year we had new functionality. We also improved the capability of the system in terms of performance. So we enhanced the system on a regular basis to make sure we are up to date in terms of methodology, standard, and technology also. We use also corporate service, IMDb, information metadatabase, business register for the frame, business collection portal for the collection, and we apply enterprise architecture integration platform for data transfer between those corporate systems. And again, we maximize the use of corporate system. So every year we integrate new survey in IBSP, and at the beginning we had around 30 survey, and now we have 130 survey in IBSP. So it's a good success, and it's a, you can see also the trend to apply a new standard for most survey in IBSP and Statistics Canada, and also apply a standard process activities. So the next slide, please, Corey. So one key element of IBSP is the application of standard in everything we do. We have an harmonized conceptual framework, a standard methodology, a standard processing activity, and we use standard classification like NAICS, NAP, standard geographic classification. And we have a kind of flexibility for having new variants, spatial aggregation for classification. But we have to make sure those new classification is approved by standard division. So we have in place a rule and a process to make sure everything is approved by standard division when we use it for a business survey. When it's done, we implement that in the system and we can apply to different survey. So the next one gives you a kind of snapshot of IBSP application. So at your left, you have all the setting that the team in charge of processing can manage. And in the right, you have, for example, if I select manage business classification, you have all the information about the classification used for the survey from the beginning of IBSP up to now. So it's a good way also to keep the documentation. It's another aspect very important to have a good traceability for the processing activity and a good documentation. So the next one provide you an overview of our principle in terms of processing activity. So all the survey has the same process, the same standard process activity. So in the past, we used to have linear process. So that means we have to complete the step 1 before starting the step 2. And this new model that we implement in the past, we don't need to wait to finish the first step to start the second step. So the idea is to start the collection activity as soon as the collection, we got the information from collection. So usually 2 weeks after collection start, we can start the iteration of rolling estimate. We can start the implementation of tax administrative data, auxiliary data, collection data, and we can do the data integration, the edit and imputation, and the estimation. That provide you as an indicator, a quality indicator of and a measure of impact of each iteration, and we can manage the collection activity, and we can target the follow-up on specific activity. So at certain point, if the quality indicator is good, we can stop the collection. That will reduce the cost and reduce the burden on respondents. So it's a standard process for all the survey. There's no different way to process the survey. They follow the same step, but they can have different parameter on each step. So if we go to the other one, so in IBSP, for a lot of financial variable, we have a common definition. So the harmonization of the variables facilitate the comparison between survey program and ensure a better coherence in the data. So in the next slide, for IBSP, we try also to use more and more administrative data to reduce the burden on the respondents and also to reduce the cost of collection, of course. And for that, we have to make sure we have a comparable information between tax and survey data. So we have a process to do the mapping to ensure that we have consistency between the data. So it's a short presentation this morning. I guess I have 10 minutes to do a quick presentation. But if you have any question, if you need more detail, you can see at the end of the presentation the information, the email from Anissa Kenny, and we can contact me also. We can provide more information, more detail about tax program, about also the IBSP program. We are doing also the same exercise that we did for IBSP. We try to harmonize all our processing activity for tax program across the organization, because different user across the organization is doing their prop manipulation of data, is derive their own variable and have their own methodology. So we try now to have a consultation and have a better approach like we did for IBSP. So that will reduce the cost, the duplication of effort, and also the cost related to the cloud storage. So thank you very much for this to be here this morning for this presentation. And as I said, if you have any question, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan and Corey, for this presentation. I know, I think you did a great job in your time, actually. So I'm checking you and stuff, but sorry. So thank you very much. I know there's a lot of stuff behind it, and you try to just go through the highlights, and I definitely invite you, the people, to ask questions if you have one more bit. Or you want some more information or clarity on some of the things that Corey and Stefan has provided today. So, until the process, we're gonna move on to the next presentation, and at the end we will have a series of discussions for all the topics from the presentation. So the next presentation is from Nirima Lau, Economic Statistic Advisor at Pacific Community, to talk about the Pacific nations in implementing international classification.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hi, warm greetings to everyone. As the title of my slide suggests, I will walk you through the challenges we in the Pacific face in using international classifications. And in doing so, it will bring out the importance of using classifications in putting the different data together from different sources. Sorry about that. So I will take you through the example of Fiji beer, and beer is a very popular drink in all our countries. So taking the example of beer in doing retail sales survey for the comparison of GDP, the data are sourced from different areas. One is the enterprise survey, which is very costly. Then there's the tax department data, and in the Pacific, a lot of informal activities happen. So there are a lot of informal sales. So to put the data from the different sources together, classification is important. So the classifications that we depend on are international classifications. And in this case, for retail sales, we use a classification that we have regionalized, and we call it PASIC, which is Pacific Standard Industrial Classification, which is based off ISAC. Now, this using international classifications and regional classifications based on them allows the Pacific Island countries and territories to compare the data internationally. It has better relevance. It reflects the real world changes. For example, up until some time for the harmonized system that we use in trade, we had typewriters. So that shows that the classification hadn't been changed for a long time in the Pacific Islands. Using international classification also gives us the chance of reconciliation, like different versions of the same classification or concordance to another classification. And this is very important because of the construction of the supply use tables or input output tables. So the classification needs to correlate to one another. It also involves a standardized and consistent approach to classifying data. For example, the categories at lower levels are subcategories of the next level up. So the constraints that many Pacific Island countries face is that they are not able to adopt the latest international classifications when they are released. We have very small offices, and of course the population is small, so you cannot have big statistical offices. The countries, as you can see in the map, they're scattered and they vary in population and geographical size. Papua New Guinea is the largest, and Tokelau is the smallest. And in terms of population, Pitcairn has 50 people. I'll give you an example of outdated classifications that were used in the Pacific. So on the left, you can see the harmonized system, a graph showing the HS that was implemented in 2017. And this graph is at June 2018. And it shows that in June 2018, the harmonized system 2017 were only implemented by 5 countries, and 2 of them, the Australia and New Zealand, so 3 Pacific Island countries only. Most were using the HS 2012. There were 3 using HS 2007, 1 using HS 2002, and 4 countries were using no classification at all. So it's the size of the officers, officers and the skills that are needed to adopt the classification that we have challenges in. Other than that, it's the commodities. So assuming that the international classification is used, the commodities are not sort of disaggregated. They are lumped together with others. The industries say and the occupations also. For example, the picture on the left is shows cover making. So you need to identify the commodity cover, which is lumped together in others. You need to identify the expenditure that is using POICOP, a household spends on cover. And the growers, how many people are engaged? So the occupation classification becomes very important. So that is where the organization I work for, the Pacific Community, stepped in. So what we did was let me talk about the ISAC. So we regionalized it to the Pacific Standard Industrial Classification, and 2014 we did that. And it's been adapted from UN's ISAC, Revision 4. And we did that by adding a 5th subclass level to take account of the specific regional economic activities in Pacific Island countries and territories. It can be easily converted to ISAC Revision 4, since the categories at the subclass level of PACSIC 2014 are subdivisions of the most detailed level of ISAC Revision 4, which is the 4-digit level known as class. At this level, the data are internationally comparable, while at the subclass level, the data are regionally comparable. So also when we derived the Pacific Standard Industrial Classification, we dropped off certain activities like the section on agriculture, forestry, and fishing, which was 0143 class was 0143, raising of camels. We don't have camels in the Pacific Islands. So there's another difference in ISAC, in PACSIC 2014, the ISCED 2011 for the section on education was added rather than the old ISCED 1997. So it was that was allowed. The slide on the right shows that there are 550 subclasses. So there are about 161 regional industrial activities that helps identify the commodities produced. So the Pacific community has regionalized 4 international classifications, and these are the 4 most widely used classifications. So the Pacific classification of individual consumption according to purpose, the Pacific Standard Industrial Classification, which I just talked about, the Pacific Standard Classification of occupations, and the Pacific Harmonized Commodity Description and Coding System. So right now, we did the 2017 HS and the 2022. So to conclude, I think for the Pacific Island countries and territories, of course, we assist them. So we use the international classifications as an enabling framework. We derive regional statistical classifications of commodities, industries, and occupations. So we use the regional standards and in putting the data together. So it's very important to data integration because there are so many different sources, especially the informal sector. So using regional classifications also sort of gives us consistent, coherent statistics that can be compared regionally, internationally, and over time. What we're doing now is we're pushing the administrative sources like the tax department in using the classifications, assigning businesses the appropriate classifications. We also talking to the registrar of businesses. So when a business gets registered, if they could assign the appropriate industry code to these businesses. So that would be a help. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilima. This interesting and presentation, and that shows, I think, how, in terms of regionalization of these international classification, you can see a particular challenges depending on the structure of the different economies. So we can see that classification have been adapted to this particular situation, and this is out of interest that we discuss generally in our community of classification. So even when we revise, these kind of thing that comes in because of all of these differences. So a really interesting perspective to also add in our discussion today. So the next presentation is to kind of have an overview of the family of international classification. So the presentation by Julian Shaw of the Chief of the Bureau of Statistics, he is a UNST. So go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, and thank you, Franklin. So the theme for today's the International Classification Sprint is about the data integration. So in the first presentation from Canada, we have heard about how we are able to try to integrate the classification into the main statistical production process. And my colleague from Nilima has shared about the experience and also the challenge in integrating the international classification at the regional level. What my focus for today's presentation is how at the international level, what are the underlying work that we are embarking in order to enhance the better linkage among various international statistical classification. In that sense, my message is quite simple, is at the international level, we have an international classification of the statistical activity that help us in order to organizing the information and also to link various classification into various statistical domain. So, international family of classification, the purpose is repository of international statistical classification, which is adopted by the UN Committee of Experts of International International Statistical Classification as a custodian in order to organize the classification. And also there's various review process and maintaining process in order to ensure the update on the classification. Next slide. So the International Family of Classification (IFC) it covers broad statistical area, including the domain of the demographic and social statistics, economic statistics, and the environment statistics. Currently, in the system, it includes 143 classifications, include, for example, the classification on the time use statistics, the ISEC industrial classification of economic activity, and also classification in the environmental domain, for example, the classification of the environmental production activities. Next slide. So with regard to the examination, this is managed by the UNSD under the auspices for the Committee of Experts of International Classification, and the information is available on the UNSD website, and it's being searchable by various statistical domain name and also by acronym. So for the metadata, it includes the basic information, for example, who is the custodian, the status, the years of its adoption, and also what is linkage to various statistical domains. It also shows the relationship of a member classification to other classification. Next slide. Yeah, so here is just showing about the information available in the website. So you are able to browse by domain and also by name. Next slide. And since the illustration and not the information currently is organizing according to the recently adopted the existing classification of the statistical activity. But last year in the commission, we adopted a revised classification of the statistical activity. And so the work forward is we are aiming to organize the various international classification according to the revised classification of the statistical activity. Next slide. So here is an example. There's also a search function where you're also able to search the classification according by name. Next one. Yeah, here is just an illustration about the type of information contained on the website, and including the current status, the methodology, and also the main principle of classification, and also to the relationship to the other international classification. So I think this is where the added information, maybe with regard to this current discussion about the integration, how the various international classification can be linked together, and the use of the international family of classification as an underlying tool in order to underpinning the linking process. Next one. Yeah, an illustration about the central product classification version 2.0. Next one. Yeah, so here is about the next step. Currently in the committee here, we are also discussing. Yesterday we have a discussion, and also we also want to embed the review process into the process about the best practice guidelines. But as for concrete next step, and there's a process in order to reorganize the classification family into the various statistical domain according to the revised CSA version 2. And also, yes, as discussed yesterday, we also identify way and also mechanism in order to keep the list of classification and also the detailed information up to date. In order the discussion about the principle, about the quality assurance, and also the process of how we are going to archiving the classification that is no longer be using, and so on. And if we are joining the committee later on, and after this session, we are also going to discuss the modernization of the classification. We are also discussing about the development of the semantic web of classification in order to see whether at the global level, where we are able to use IFC as underlying foundation built into the IT system to see how the different classification can be linked together using the machine learning. Yeah, and finally, this is the last one is to use the international family classification as a tool for linking international statistical classification under various domains. And next slide, which is my final slide. This is more about an illustration. Maybe through the IFC as a repository to organize the information, the aspiration, the vision is we hope that this can be used as an information to link the various classification together in order to support the higher, maybe the data linking process, both for the statistical production process and also for the mainstreaming for the international and the national level. So again, this is my final slide. Hope that this can give you a kind of an illustration of the vision on the enabling of the IFC as a linkage for the various national classification. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Julian, and thank you everyone, all the presenters. I think, like I said, we all did a really great job. We are, if I look at the agenda, exactly where we want it to be after the presentation. So this is, we have our session to open to some discussions based on what you heard this morning. Before we get into the questions, we wanted to invite our colleague from head of Department of Industrial Statistics in Ghana, just to give us some perspective on and again, in terms of regional practices and what is happening in different areas. So, Anthony Kragak, if you can take the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to lead a discussion on this. Clearly, I mean, we know the importance of statistical classifications. As Julian just took us through the 43 approved family of international classifications, running through demographic, social statistics, economic statistics, and environmental statistics. But we all know, I mean, from the previous surveys that have been conducted on the review of the cycle and the review of the use, that just a few, the uptake of such classifications in various countries are quite on the low side. I mean, for instance, we have the 2023 review cycle survey indicating that about just 59% of countries adopt and adapt the use of the ISIC, the mother of all classifications, which is quite, I believe, on the low side, which many countries still use the previous revisions, the revision 3, for instance. And the issue could be as a result of the difficulty or the inability to internalize the use of ISIC in various countries, seeing the importance of it in the various countries and using it. Probably many countries will still refer to it as purely a requirement or recommendation, without necessarily internalizing the use of it for data integration in various countries. But the question really is it really important? And of course, yes, to use classifications, because of course, as has been presented by the director of UNSD and other presenters, it enhances quality statistics and it's with high precision. And there's also then mutual exclusivity in the definitions, and also when we want to do repetitiveness in the statistical experiment, it enhances. You can really actually measure the actual changes over time, which may dovetail into policy effects and assessing the effectiveness of policies over time. So in short, the classification, international classifications can ensure the production of quality statistics, national statistics for evidence-based decisions, and also for policy effectiveness, to assess the policy effectiveness in our various countries. For NSOs, the National Statistical Offices, as pointed by the fundamental principle of official statistics by the UN, to provide the basis for official statistics, which we all know. So do we need classifications for data integration within and outside NSOs? Of course, we need it. NSOs are the focal point of official statistics and the coordinator of the National Statistical System. And to ensure data integration, there's a need for other statistical producing agencies to use the same classifications as the NSOs to be able to bring these data together, to merge and compare statistics across the various data producing agencies in the various countries, and also to understand the data of the various producing agencies as well. Because that ensures exhaustiveness and mutual exclusivity in the field of data integration. It can be a critical limitation for the use of administrative data for many countries, for developing countries, where they are not adopting these international classifications. Because if you don't have the same definition across the producers, then it's difficult to be able to adopt or to bring on board administrative data from other institutions. But the classifications have to be international in nature, otherwise or have correspondence with international classifications like the UN classifications. Otherwise, then it limits its use internationally as well. So how do we enhance the adoption and use of international classifications in various countries? As a focal point of the official statistics and the coordinator of national statistical systems, I believe that the NSO should be able to lead these discussions and enhance the use of these, and probably they should be able to advocate more for the use of the classifications across the various producers of statistics within national statistical systems in various countries, and also train members of the national statistical systems on these applications in the various countries. For instance, in Ghana, we have previously trained some institutions that are data producers in the national statistical systems on the IC version 4. And as we move on to the next, to conduct our next economic census in 2023, by the end of the year, hopefully, we intend to also train other institutions within the national statistical systems to be able to adopt the version 5, so that you can be on the same page, and then that will enhance our data integration between our statistical system and the NSOs and other producers of the data in the country. More importantly, the NSO should adopt the use and update the latest classifications, because we all know that the latest classification reflects modern trends and structural changes. And so if we do not adopt the modern classifications, it limits us in terms of definitions of the modern issues or modern phenomena in our country. We heard Koi from Canada showing us the importance of the Integrated Business Statistics Program, the IBSP, to leverage and operational standards right from the survey design stage to dissemination. And he indicated that maximizes the use of administrative data if they do this. And it also informed us that to fully benefit from these user classification, they need to harmonize the conceptual framework, as I said earlier. If countries are able to ensure that the national statistical system, the producers within the national statistical system, all adopt the use of classifications, then it will ensure that there's full benefits from the use of classifications. On the other hand, Nilima pointed out that the Pacific Island nations cannot adopt modern international classification because of the lack of capacity regarding number of staff and expertise. This clearly tells us there's a clear variation in adoption, and the use across developing and developing countries. The question then is, how can countries enhance the use of the 143 family of classifications to foster data integration? That's a big question for us all. Consider the significance of its use and data integration, both nationally and internationally, as has been pointed out. So I believe that, as I discussed in discussing this, I believe that we need to address the following questions, probably that could enhance the use of this, in terms of which institutions or structures we have in our various countries that could facilitate the deployment of classifications, which institutions we have in the country. As I said, I would point to the NSOs to lead the discussions and do a lot of advocacy and ensure that they bring on board a lot of data producers. And how would they implement it? And how do they have the mandate? The NSOs or whichever structures we have in our various countries have the mandate to be able to coordinate these, ensure that data producers across various institutions in various countries adopt and implement classifications. The question is, that institution or the structure that we have in our various countries, can they institutionalize the process and seek its internalization in the institutions of data producers, so that it's not just a mere requirement by international organizations, but the institutions themselves have accepted it and have internalized it as a critical path to ensure data integration across various institutions in our country. And the last question we should think about is what role can the UN play to enhance the use of classifications in various countries to facilitate data integration? If the chair will agree, now open up for some few suggestions to this effect that would address the issue of using classifications to enhance data integration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony, for this really good again. Also facilitate my work. I think I won't need to go through all of the presentation again and give a resume. I think you did it greatly there to really set up the tone in terms of what kind of a question we need to be asking after hearing what we heard this morning. So excellent work there. So the line will open if you have questions for the presenters in what they said and or anything else you want to discuss this morning.
Yes, we are trying to monitor the chat and ask them to raise their hands.
Yeah, so there's also possibility to send a question via the chat.
Raise their hand.
Yeah, or raise your hand on the application. Or in the room as well, if you have. I have one question for directly to Canada. If there's no questions there, of course. You have any?
There's a question from Sonia Rees. Question for all presenters. What is the biggest challenge in achieving compliance? The biggest challenge.
Biggest challenge in
achieving
compliance. Great question.
This is itself a challenge, right?
So who want to go first? I'll call it online, Canada. Before the presenters. Okay. So let's go with that one first, and we're going to try to collect more questions at once. So you can answer that one first.
Next one coming.
Yes, compliance.
Okay, in my presentation, I did mention the challenges, and I think the biggest one for us is the size of the organizations. For example, there's one country which is Niue, and the capacity there is 3 people only in the stats office. The population is not much, but right now there's only 1 person in place. So adoption of classification becomes difficult. So that is why we've stepped in. I think it's the numbers. Numbers do count. 1 person cannot, do everything. So the number of staff. If that's the biggest challenge, so that's the biggest challenge in our islands.
Next question is for Julia. What is the purpose of the International Family of Classifications or UNSD? Because the purpose
Yeah, we get used to unmute the microphone for the laptop and speak. And with regard to the purpose for the International Family of Classification, we really hope that this is a kind of a repository and also a kind of a central information in order to organize various international statistical classification according to different domains. And yes, so by collecting this information itself is already very useful in this regard. And also during the process, we also want to ensure that that the most relevant classification is being updated, and also we keep maintaining to ensure that the classification in the family is relevant for the current use for the statistical production process. Of course, maybe the issue of how we are going to update and how we are going to maintain, this is also an issue that we are ongoingly currently looking into. And so as I mentioned in the presentation, so currently the committee, we are also in the process of looking at how we are able to better maintain and also to have a process in order to improve the quality review process and also the process about the adopting the new classification and retiring new classification. And I hope this answered the question. And maybe later on in the presentation, maybe some other speakers may also be able to address this topic.
And maybe I can answer the next question. Next question is about ISIC revision 5. Will it include like different aggregations, variants, and different alternative structure for the green economy, digital economy, but then we are still working on them. Since this week, we are here at the committee of the classification experts are having a meeting here, trying to review the ISIC 5 expert notes and also the introductory text. But we are still working on the alternative structure, the variant, the different aggregation for the green economy and digital economy. So still work in progress, in short. Thank you. And the next question, what is your take on domesticating international classification by countries to suit their unique scenarios? I mean, this is about the implementation of international standards to adapt to their national circumstances, right? Is any presenter?
All right. So I think at this point we will resume. We will conclude on this presentation, this discussion period. And we will, again, I think people will probably continue sending some questions, which I will look in there if we need to reply to people directly. We can find a way to do that. So we're going to continue the round of presentation for this morning. The next presentation covered the use of statistical classification for admin purposes. We've already heard some of our presentation actually lean on this topic a little bit in the presentation. Probably shows that it's important of this kind of evolution in the way classification has been used across the statistical production. So the next presenter, Andrew Hancock, principal analyst from Statistical New Zealand, to talk about statistical versus administrative classification.
Thank you, Franklin. The presentation may not go with the brief, but we'll see how we go. Slide 3. So classifications, as we've talked about, are the cornerstone of statistics and the building blocks for interpreting and understanding data. Without these foundational pieces, the whole story that the data needs to deliver is not there. But whilst the classifications by themselves are only one piece of the puzzle, they also provide a connection point for integration of data and information that enables policy and decision making. Since the days of Aristotle and Linnaeus, classifications have very much been structured and created in the same way and for the same purpose, but often are an invisible and often taken for granted part of the wider global narrative of national statistical offices. That said, we have Principle 9 of the United Nations Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics, which underpins the work of our committee, that use by statistical agencies in each country of international concepts, classifications, and methods promotes the consistency and efficiency of statistical systems at all official levels. Traditionally, statistical classifications produced by national statistical offices or international organisations have been seen as methodologically sound, adhering to best practice principles of classification theory and statistics, and fundamentally designed for the sole purpose of producing official statistics. All other classifications in the world do not receive the same level of credits, particularly those in administrative or non-statistical uses. And a historic disconnect between the way statistical officers see the value and importance of their classifications compared to those used by administrative agencies. But the national stats officers or international organisations do not have a monopoly on the production of official statistics, as other agencies and organisations' bodies may be charged with producing statistics for policy and decision making. Neither do the national stats officers or international organisations have a monopoly on the classifications that are in use in the statistical system, or how they are used, particularly in the non-statistical or legislated data environments. So is it practical for those agencies to envisage or anticipate all the expected and unexpected consequences of classification usage and then try and accommodate that in the development process, as this may influence the adoption or adaptation of international statistical classifications? Legislative use of statistical classifications also poses significant issues for the development and purpose of those classifications within official statistics, and the related integration and consistency of data for policy and decision making, whether at national, regional, or international level. Embedding classifications into legislation or regulation then gives them a status of an official list and a formal benchmark against which legal consequences may flow. This may not be appropriate and challenges the context of using international statistical classifications for national adaptations. Next slide. So some challenges. Statistical classifications need to be able to provide, as a minimum, some definition or context relating to the category being classified, and not to serve as a framework for producing numbers or data on a domain or topic. Users need to understand the scope of a particular entity or category and its relationships within the classification hierarchy to other categories. Definitional context enables the distinction between categories to be made, and there's a mechanism for theoretical distinction and mutual exclusivity to be applied. But the content of any statistical classification is somewhat ad hoc, as it very much comes back to what is the need for the purpose of the classification, the ability to identify the units to be measured and classified, and for what purpose, and what is the fundamental scope of the classification. Their development very much supports the strategic direction for national statistical officers, but they're never really given the support and funding they need to realise their potential. And international statistical classifications are not developed for niche or narrow purposes. They are there to enable global consistency for the integration of data, but they suffer somewhat from the global developed country developing divide and the jurisdictional influences that regional or national politics or legislations provide. Global integration is hampered by regional legislative or regulatory need, as these needs are often at odds with the traditional classification revision processes. And often it is beyond the resource capability and capacity of classification developers to incorporate great amounts of detail in classifications. But the challenge for us is that the users are always wanting a richer data narrative and an understanding of the contemporary reality of an economy or a labour market, just as much as being able to understand and analyse time series trends or get straight counts of users. However, there is a reluctance to incorporate non-statistical usage and legislative equivalence when developing national or international classifications. National stats officers are not always subject matter experts, nor are they responsible for wider policy, legislative and information management. They often have limited interest in the broader context or content, let alone capacity and resource to expand the scope and content of the classifications beyond the immediate need for producing official statistics. Subject matter experts and classification custodians, whether regional or international, are equally, in many instances, having limited interest in the broader context of official statistics and data integration. They often don't have capacity and resource to expand the scope and content of classifications beyond their immediate need, nor appreciate how their classifications and frameworks assimilate back into the statistical system. However, there may also be differing legislative implications and demands placed on them. For example, an occupation classification is usually developed to get counts of persons employed in a specific occupation category to understand the composition of a labour market, whether national, regional or international. Yet that same classification may be used to structure job The same classification may be used to structure job matching or careers advisory platforms. Vocational assessment for persons returning to the workforce from injury will be used as a proxy for labour market skill analysis or skill migration and awarding workplace visas. The application of such a classification in the context of immigration policy can be in conflict with the context of statistical purpose, especially if there are legal consequences of the immigration process which do not exist with the application of the classification in the statistical process. How far should the wider use like that influence the development of the classification, and should that approach change to enable better information for the users? However, there are benefits in changing the model of statistical classifications to integrate and leverage of other frameworks or platforms to enhance the data narrative. This doesn't mean that the statistical classification needs to be replaced by another framework. It is more about linking content and process to reduce development burden and making this more dynamic. Removing hierarchical structures and turning these into aggregated or views off a master list gives more flexibility to users, but also allows statistical officers to work more closely with other agencies or organisations to assimilate content without having to become subject matter experts themselves, nor invest in expensive revision processes and governance models. Next slide, Jerry. So as an illustrative example, this is just a visualization of what we're thinking about doing with occupation in the New Zealand context. We currently have a 5-level occupation classification, which has over 1,000 occupation categories at its lowest level. It's a massive overhead for us to maintain, revise and update that classification, particularly as it's also a joint classification with our colleagues in Australia. What we're looking to do is take that lowest level of the classification and turn it into a flat list, which will be dynamically updated to enable us to have a more flexible, user-driven approach to the occupation categories that are included. We still maintain concordances and correspondences to the existing international standards, whether that's the ISCO from the ILO or the US classification or even the Canadian one. And also to previous versions of our own classification to maintain the time series. But what we now are able to do is take those occupation categories and link them to an administrative platform, which has been designed obviously for careers, pathways and vocational education training. And that platform holds significant information about skills and qualifications and job roles and job vacancies, all things that the users want as part of the narrative when we go out to talk to them about advising occupation classifications. Can you include all this extra information about skills and career pathways and jobs? So by linking to the underpinning framework that sits within the administrative platform, we can pull all that existing developed content from that platform through into the statistical environment for users to take advantage of. Now, it's all very well having an output of a classification category of cotton grower, for example, in the population census, because all the information you'll get is the words cotton grower and a number, which basically tells you these are the number of respondents that have been classified by the statistical agency to that code. The classification may have a very narrow definitive statement about the scope of that occupation, but you don't know the range of skills, you don't know the range of competencies, you don't know the job opportunities that come from that, you don't have any other information. So this approach now allows us to pull that in. It also allows us to take advantage of any search and discovery hierarchies that are inbuilt to the platform, because we can create those as views of the flat list. So for example, we can maintain major groups of an existing classification, or we could move to more wider administrative groups, link to those, and then use that to take you right through to the actual job information. But the wider issue is the consistency of But the wider issue is the consistency in the application of the concepts and definitions that the statistical classification provide, and what it means if they're interpreted or applied differently. Now, one of the advantages of what we want to do with occupation is that it will enable us to have a more dynamic updating of content. It will reduce cost and time and resource for us as a statistical agency. and allow wider use of technologies such as APIs and semantic web. It provides integration of like platforms holding similar information and content, and it enables us to get to a more federated data system. The model can be used for any classification, whether it's industries, products, commodities, education, languages, countries, and is more dynamic and less resource intense. The ultimate goal is that everyone is on the same page, using the same thing in the same way, but that is not the reality, despite our best efforts. Sorry, Drew, can you go better? No. Yep, with it, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, as I was saying, the ultimate goal and ideal is that everyone's on the same page using the same thing. That's why we have standards. But our challenge is the compliance and enforcement of those. Agencies and countries could be using the same classification, but not necessarily the same version. For example, ISAC Group 3 compared to ISAC Group 4.1, and now ISAC Group 5. There are also some other quirky things we've uncovered, and one of them I've highlighted here is the recent European Union and New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which was signed on the 1st of July this year. It references the central product classification, as well as the harmonised system. However, it defines CPC as the provisional central product classification with the reference, which is 1991's version of CPC, not even referencing the current 2.0. And this is a legislative free trade agreement. So, it's an example where an international standard is being used, but it's not necessarily up to date because the parties involved in the conversation haven't properly understood what's available. So what is the value of international standards such as ISAC or CPC? So countries or regional organisations then go and do their own thing. And then we get into the whole debate around NACE versus NAICS versus ANSIC. The recent ISAC revision has attempted to address that by bringing greater alignment between NACE and NAICS, ISAC. But do we as statisticians really care if our classifications, terms and concepts are not treated or applied in identical fashion domestically and internationally? International standards are more often bridges for data reporting than actual usable classifications in many respects. There is a need for consistency of shared data and information as opposed to rigid conceptual and structural adherence at all costs to a statistical classification. Another example we have is the definition of goods as a concept which in the Balance of Payments Manual says one thing, the System of National Accounts says a very similar thing, but it's not identical. So those two definitions can be interpreted and applied differently, even though they're fundamentally meant to be covering the same thing. When you bring in a legislative issue, we have different pieces of legislation then define and change the scope. How does that enable classification developers to actually achieve consistency and get good integrated information? So as we change our thinking on how we develop statistical classifications and how we expand the data narrative by integration with non-statistical based content and potential legislative content, do our governance models and our processes getting consensus on an agreed classification going forward need to change? What then becomes the challenges for the implementation and revision cycles? At the international level, we have a process through governance that endorsement and support for classifications comes from the Committee of Experts on International Statistical Classifications, even if there is a custodian-based approval process. The committee then recommends and endorses the Statistical Commission those classifications for final endorsement, and then they are included in the International Family of Statistical Classifications. It then becomes a process for national, regional, or international organisations to actually implement or encourage uptake. At the national level, the situation is undoubtedly a bit different, as it is contingent on what the national approach is around utilising the international classification in the national context. and how your own legislative processes for the statisticians may drive what powers they have to endorse and improve classifications. Next slide, please, Jerry. So going back to the occupation example, traditionally the statistical office will do everything that's on that side. By moving to a new process, we can become a stakeholder in an already established process. The administrative organisations already set up governance models, content management, relationships with key providers. It's silly for us to come along and duplicate that in the revision cycle. So we're now looking at how we can just become a stakeholder in the wider process, which may or may not be led by us, or maybe led collaboratively from another agency. We think that will make a more efficient process. It reduces costs because we're not having two governance models, we're not having two stakeholder consultation processes, we're not duplicating effort. But governance structures are a restriction on how and when we revise our classifications because they take up a large proportion of the time in the process, along with the implementation. And so a critical factor becomes the frequency of revision cycles. That's something that the committee is going to be talking about this week. We're fortunate that some classifications like the harmonised system have clear revision cycles, but others are a bit more ad hoc. Broad economic categories every so often, standard international trade, it's been some time. And the range of revision cycles could go anywhere between 10 to 25 years. Yet the users are constantly demanding dynamic data and contemporary reality. We combat that argument by saying we need to maintain nice, consistent time series because of the analytical need. But just because we can start doing things faster doesn't necessarily mean we're doing things better. And if you have regulatory or legislative needs, for example, European Union regulations or national legislation requirements influencing when and how you can revise, there are a lot of issues for us. Next slide. So there are a number of questions for us to consider as a committee and as a community. What is the purpose and role of an international statistical classification? Is it something everyone must use as is, or is it there as a guiding mechanism, or is simply there as something that agencies have to link against to report for data for different reporting purposes? How important are traditional 10, 15, 20-year revision cycle processes when we have significant advances in technology which makes us able to do things faster and more dynamically? Should regulatory or legislative processes drive or influence revision cycles and the content? And why are statistical agencies scared of working with administrative agencies to share and integrate information and moving away from the them and us sort of situation we have? Can we as a classifications community be more willing to leverage off each other's work rather than always doing our own thing? And how do we improve implementation processes and get countries on the same footing at the same time? And do we need to? Last slide. So statistical classifications have a wider role in the modern global economy as policy and data needs expand to reflect the dynamic changes in the real world. Static classifications reviewed on a cyclical process will always be out of date on release. So technology and a change in thinking on what classifications can do and a change in the role of statistical agencies to be equal stakeholders or advisors with administrative agencies is more sensible. New thinking around the purpose and value of international classifications needs to be introduced. Leveraging of existing content, integrating platforms and working collaboratively across the data system is the way forward. And this may sound heresy coming from the chair of the Committee of International Experts, but hierarchical statistical classifications as we know them have had their day. Ultimately, we are all doing the same thing for the same purpose and need to work as one and share and use relevant information wherever possible. So let's not duplicate effort and work more collaboratively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a lot of up there digest for this team, but definitely really interesting thing that kind of, I think, make us think a little bit more about where we want to go really pieces classification in general. So next presentation, again, in terms of the fluidity of this thing, I think that it's perfectly after what you just said, because a few times you mentioned that legal aspect, and we really wanted to our European to share the experience of actually embedded very important classification in the legislative actions in Europe. So Claude Marquis from Eurostat is going to talk about the example of Europe. Claude?
Thank you, Franklin. I don't see my slides. Do I have to share my screen or?
We can share the slide for you. We can run the slide for you from our side. 1 second.
Okay, in the meantime, I start and saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, also from my part. My presentation will focus on the legal part of the construction and the implementation of classification, focusing on the European situation, on the European reality. Important to clarify at the beginning is that Europe is not only the European Union, so this union between 27 countries. Europe is also the European Economic Area, composed by the 27 EU countries and the 3 additional countries. Europe is also the European Free Trade Association, composed by the 3 European Economic Area countries and the 4th country. Europe is also the candidate countries. So there's other 3rd country which have asked to become members of the EU and are currently in a preparation and introduction phase. In Europe, there are around 50 countries which have not all direct agreement with the EU and the EU Commission and Eurostat. But in all these parts of Europe, there are different laws, different regulation, and so on. And I must say that in my short presentation, I cannot consider all these particularities. I have limited the presentation at a broad outline based on the reality around the European Union. Now, which question could be connected to the legal framework of classification? First of all, how are new classification or revised classification version integrated from a legal point of view into the statistical system, if there is a legal framework? Are there laws, are there standards, agreements governing the use of revised classification in the statistical context? Or is this all a simpler way, in a simpler way, without the need to have a directive, top-down rules? Which are the different methods approach to face this question? And finally, is there a difference between the regional and the national levels and between the different countries at national level? Next one, please. I start at the upper level, at the higher level, the EU level, so the European Union, and that's 27 countries, as you know, and with the NACE regulation. NACE is the Economic Activity Classification. Europe, it's a European version of ISIC. And regulation. What does regulation mean? Regulation is a legal act of the EU, which is enforced in all 27 member states simultaneously. So if a regulation is not respected, applied, the Commission launch so-called infringement procedure. with all what it entails. I think this is not the moment to go too in details with us. But what does the NACE regulation say? The Commission, so Eurostat, shall use NACE for all statistics classified according to economic activities. And member state statistics presented according to economic activity shall be produced using NACE or a national classification derived therefrom. So EU members have the possibility to create a national version. Member states shall forward to the Commission for its approval prior to their publication the drafts defining or modifying their national classification. And in the event of incompatibility between certain NACE headings and the national economic structure, the Commission, the EU Commission, may authorize exceptions that are regularly checked if they remain justified. So, as you can see, the room for maneuver for the EU country is therefore rather limited, and everything is clearly, let's say, regulated. Next one, please. NACE is, of course, not the only classification of Eurostat. There are many more. I did not go through all regulation of this classification, but I limited myself to some of the most used economic classification. And here as well, we find the same compulsoriness we already have in NACE. So, for example, for the CPA is the Eurostat product classification. So let's say the European version of CPC. Here as well, the Commission shall use the CPA for all statistics classified according to the product by activities. Another used classification is PRODCOM classification. PRODCOM is the industrial product classification. It's more detailed as the CPA and covers sections B and C of NACE and ISIC. And here as well, member states carry out a community statistical survey of industrial production, and the production recorded in this field should be defined by the list of products hereafter referred to as the PRODCOM list. So there is a clear indication on where the product classification, the PRODCOM classification or PRODCOM list has to be implemented and used. Next one, please. Now, once a new classification or an updated classification has been endorsed, it has to be implemented. Implemented into the statistical production system. And here as well, and I take again the example of NACE, there is a regulation that defines when statistical products have to be produced with the new classification. And this NACE delegated regulation says that this regulation shall apply to the data transmission to the Commission, Eurostat, relating to each reference period from the 1st January, in our case, 2025. Now, this is, in other words, the regulation contains the list of statistical products with an indication of when this data have to be produced based on the new classification, a kind of timetable starting by statistical business register, and then followed by the different statistical products. That can be structural business statistics, short-term statistic, and so on, up to national account, all statistics using NACE, and on when member states have to make available their data to Eurostat in the new classification version. And here what is important is that the implementation of a new classification is done by statistical product based on the EU regulation, not in the discretion of member states. So there is no way that the country implements the new classification at the year T and another country in the year T+1. So data for a specific statistical product have to be made available all in the same classification at the same time. And next one, please. Then there are agreements with third countries. So Eurostat classification are used also outside the European Union, and this allows also the centralized publication by Eurostat of statistical data of more European countries. And there is first example in Europe, there is a European Economic Area. It's composed by the 27 EU countries and by 3 additional countries. And for several EU regulations concerning economic issues are classified as with EEA, so European Economic Area relevance. That means that these regulations have to be respected also by these 3 additional countries. And so this is the case also for regulation concerning several classification. In any case, for NACE, CPA, and PROTCOM. So there is no difference in this case between EU and the economic area, European Economic Area countries. Then there are also bilateral agreements with third countries. Here as well, to allow the dissemination of statistical data in Eurostat publication. And here the mandatory use of official Eurostat classification is not explicitly mentioned in the agreement, but data must be sent to Eurostat coded with official Eurostat classification. So in other words, the country have the possibility in theory to work with other national classification, but have to send to Eurostat their data in an official classification if they want their data published in EU in a Eurostat publication. Finally, there are candidate countries which are in, as I did say before, in a phase of integration in the EU. So this phase lasts several years or even more, and have to use in their statistic the official Eurostat classification. And these rules are mandatory for them in order also to be accepted, to be integrated in the European Union. Next one, please. If we go down to national level, the situation changes a little bit. So we have seen the European Union and the EEA countries must apply the European Union regulation, but have the option to create a national version of this classification. However, the national version of this EU statistical classification must be validated and approved by Eurostat. So these countries have to be fully compliant with the EU structure, with the EU legislation. Countries can, of course, create additional statistical classification produced with national stakeholders and validated by national statistical authority, but for national data only. So for data sent to Eurostat, they have to be coded with the Eurostat classification. Generally, and I underline generally, there are no laws for the implementation of additional statistical classification at national level, but they are integrated into national statistical programs, implementation plan, etc., which have, of course, to be followed, but are not, let's say, laws. I repeat here generally, because I cannot be 100% precise at this point. There are countries in which the implementation of additional national classification are mandatory by law, but at our knowledge, there are not so many. Next one.
Sorry, we are running behind the schedule. I just want to see whether you're able to finish your presentation in the next 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
I have 2 slides more. Okay. And just 2 words concerning what happens with the use of statistical classification outside the statistical offices. So there is an increasing use of official statistical classification in administrative data, and here I think only at the many open data initiatives. And the implementation of new statistical classification in administrative data is practically not regulated. Here as well, it is impossible to be 100% precise. Administrative data managers are rather reluctant to immediately update classification. This often because of the resource cost reasons. And the implementation of new classification version are done at a later stage. There is even a case in which a national administrative register still used in 2019 classification from 1980, so 40 years old classification. Then, on the other hand, there are trade associations which are less reluctant to introduce the new version of the statistical classification. And many of them are also more active or very active during the construction phase of classification. There will be, and during the next webinar, presentation of the European Textile Association on this issue. Next slide and last one. What can we conclude? So first of all, that the regulation, the laws are mainly defined at regional level, at European level. There are possible also regulation for pure national classification, but their number is in our knowledge not so high. Administrative data owners do not necessarily update regularly statistical classification. At the European level, the implementation of statistical classification is made by statistical products, not by member state. So there is no way for countries to decide when to implement a new classification. So there is the timetable which defines everything. And I have not mentioned it before, but the need to update or reformulate regulation affects also the duration of the revision of classification, lengthening the process. Once a new or update classification is defined from a content point of view, in Europe, the legal procedure starts, and this legal procedure may last even until 30 months, so 2.5 years. And what's happened with the current NACE version. So that's everything from my part, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Claude. Again, interesting perspective. Because I would definitely want to, finish around 10 as announced in the invitation. So the next presentation is from Yusuf Ariami of the Oman National Center for Information. So we have another challenge to try to wrap up the presentation as fast as you can. So go ahead. You have the line.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank for this invitation to be in this high group meeting. Just in general, maybe I will, my presentation is not much longer, so I'm going to focus in our experience to use all the classification during our census 2020. But before that, I want to share also to mention in this point, we start to use the international classification. Let's say, for example, for the social, we use QuickHope during the household income survey also from long time, as well as we are using for ISIC and CBC, also the link between CBC and for HS code, this is for trade. However, when we start to think to use the fully census by administrative or by register, I think maybe there is some question raised about what's the challenge. Of course, the challenge started when there's a different or there's a variation in the different database between the unit in the government. For that, we worked first of all to clean all the database in each unit in order to be easy to integrate the different database at the one hub later on. Yes, as we can see in this first slide, we can see which classification has been used during the census, and this is not only for this. Honestly, later on or now or currently, it's continuous as we get it for our data strategy in Oman. Each database or each unit, they have to apply all this classification in your database or when you will produce the data. So we have something we call it the trends table, and also we have classification of administrative division. We have international classification of nationalities, classification of education, and also we have for national classification of economic activities. As we are the GCC country, of course, there is a comment. We have classification we call for occupational classification, and finally we have the international classification of institutional sectors. Next slide, please. Yes, this is what I mean here. For example, before that, each database have a different classification. For example, some database that said they are using this the name for gender. But based on this classification, of course, we start to use one classification, and also for martial status, we give each status we have. There is also classification, and also the legal type of an institution. They have got it also classification. In general, all this has been applied during the census. Next slide, please. About the classification of administrative definition, of course, Oman, it has 11 regions. For that, this classification now, you can find it everywhere when you access to think about the name. Well, maybe sometime we have to think this in the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Internal, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Higher Education, or whatever. But by the end, there's one classification it should be used in order to integrate all this information in one database. For that, this has been applied during the census, and also currently also has been used the same. Next slide. Regarding the nationality, of course, there is many questions or requested to have or to classify the nationality. That's for experts who came to country. For that, we have this classification, and also this is also applied for let's say for civil registration. I mean, for OROB in Oman. This is also very important for each nationality to access to Oman. It has to be a code rather than nationality itself. For that, you can see this, or this is available now, which is also easy and also help to integrate the nationality with their different also variable when we use any report about the kind of people in Oman, or what's the percentage of each nationality. And this is also we have a code for each nationality. This is also can get it when you get a visa for each people to come to Oman. Next slide. Of course, for classification of education, we are used before that in the statistic office ASCID for different level. But this is honestly before 2020 wasn't applied also in Ministry of Education or Ministry of Education. After this national project, I mean, since 2020, all these ministries and also statistic office apply the same classification. That's be easy also to follow at some indicator that we needed, whereas for national level or for an international level. As you can see here, we have a different level until 8th level based on the ASCID classification of education. Next slide. According for the classification also for education, as you can see here, we have get it a code from 0 to 10. This is also, of course, this international classification ASCID. And the good things for this is also help a lot to fit the questionnaire which you receive it from different organization, that to be easy as maybe classification. All of us believe this is the key or the key language between all the countries, and this is also help us a lot to reduce the gap for some missing information when we apply when we follow up the questionnaire which we receive it from different organization. Next, please. Here also we have, of course, this is for economic. We use the two classification. Of course, for activities we use Isaac 4, and also we have maybe we applied in all units that we deal with the economic activities. They have to use, for example, this year we shipped from Isaac 3 to Isaac 4. So all the unit in Oman, they have to follow the same, such as Ministry of Commerce, Central Bank, they have to shift at the same time. For that, it was easy also to compare the definition of the for economy. For example, if any establishment register in Ministry of Commerce, we have to link this in which activities. And of course, as you can see here, there is a different, level by section or by first level or also by section. And here in Oman, we recorded until 4 digits. Also you can see in the right side of this slide for each activities, we have maybe the section or the class or also the level of activities. That also was used during the census, and also still it's applied in all database up to date. Next slide, please. For GCC, of course, there is a common indicator, and also there's classification system between the GCC. It's not as the new for GCC as it just give more, more digit or more breakdown for the classification, and also this is more, it's for occupational level. And this is after we get it or identify, develop the list of occupational in the GCC. We decide to have one classification, and this is we are using just between the GCC country.
And sorry, Yusuf, we are running out of time. I just want to see whether you're able to finish your
next slide. Next slide, please. And this is the, international classification of institution sectors. As you can see here, for government, we have a sectors, we have classification. For private sector, we have commercial and family and others. As you can see here, for each sector, we have specific classification in order to make a distinguish between this, for example, establishment related to which sectors. I think this is the last. Yes, and by the end, you can see all this classification has been documented in our website, and this is for portal sensitive. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, so again, sorry for pushing. I think that's why it's called a sprint. Trying to talk about a lot of things in a short period of time. So thank you all the presenters for all your efforts to try to present all of these things in like I said, in a short period of time. So to conclude, we have we have Andre and Andrew to do some of the closing remarks for what we heard today. So Andre.
Thank you, Franklin. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'll be quick because we are out of time. I do want to thank all the presenters and everyone who participated in the webinar. There's a lot of information that was shared today. I think it illustrated well the role of classifications as a building block for data integration. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. We didn't have as much time in the agenda for Q&As. We'll try to sort that out for the next sprint. But certainly we kept track of all the questions and we will sort of have an opportunity, I think, to get back to some of these questions at the other sprints. So we will be preparing a summary of the session and we did record, so it will be posted on the website. But building on today's session, we will have 2 more webinars coming up in the series. So the second webinar is going to be on November 29th, and we're going to focus on ideas and mechanisms for rendering the classification process more efficient through collaboration and coordination. And the third webinar, which will be January 31st, is on the role of technology in the classification work. So I hope you've received these invitations. If not, please contact us. Agendas for the meetings will be posted on the UNSD website, on the page for the Network of Economic Statisticians, but also on the Committee of Experts for International Classifications websites. So again, thank you all for your participation. I thought it was an interesting discussion. A lot of material was presented, and I look forward to the next one. And I guess I'll turn it over to Andrew, who can close off the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Andre. We appreciate the contributions of all the participants today, and the committee formally would like to thank the network for this opportunity to run these sprints. As Andre said, we've got 2 more, so we're looking forward to what that will bring. And also just like to conclude by thanking Franklin for chairing the meeting in semi-challenging fashion. And as you said, whether we've run a sprint today, I'm not sure. It was probably a middle distance race in response. But so thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you all at the next sprint.